good morning, or good afternoon, or good evening, wherever you are right now. Maybe you are sitting at a desk. Maybe you are on a bus with your headphones in. Maybe you are walking slowly down a quiet street after a long day. I want you to imagine, just for a moment, that you and I are sitting together in a small, warm room. There is a window beside us, and through it we can see a city that never quite stops moving. Cars pass, people hurry, lights change from red to green to yellow and back again. Inside this room, though, everything feels softer. The air is steady. Your breathing slows, and I am here with you, not as a teacher correcting you, but as someone who is simply thinking with you in English. Today, I want to talk about something many of us know very well, even if we rarely admit it out loud. I want to talk about those moments at work when you pretend to be busy. Not because you are lazy, not because you do not care, but because something inside you needs a little space. The way we perform busyness, the way we hide behind screens, the way we type quickly even when we have nothing urgent to say. This is not just about office life. It is about how we show ourselves to the world and how we sometimes disappear inside our own routines. Let me take you back to a morning I remember clearly. It was not a special morning. That is exactly why it stays with me. I arrived at the office a little earlier than usual. The building was still half asleep. The automatic doors slid open with a soft whoosh, and I stepped inside, feeling the familiar coolness of air conditioning against my skin. The lobby smelled faintly of coffee and cleaning spray. My footsteps echoed lightly on the polished floor as I walked toward the elevator. Inside the elevator, there were two other people. We did not speak. We did not even really look at each other. Our eyes rested on our phones, on the changing numbers above the doors, on anything that allowed us to avoid connection. I could feel that shared, quiet understanding that this was just another day, another climb upward, floor by floor, toward responsibilities we did not fully choose but had accepted anyway. When I reached my floor, the office was still quiet. The lights were on, but dim. Rows of desks stretched out like an orderly city of their own, chairs tucked neatly under tables, monitors black and waiting. I walked to my desk, set down my bag, and turned on my computer. The familiar hum filled the space. That small sound felt strangely comforting, like the beginning of a story I already knew by heart. I remember sitting there, hands resting lightly on the keyboard, watching the screen slowly wake up. And in that moment, I felt something very subtle, but very real. A small hesitation, a tiny pause inside me. Not a dramatic feeling, just a quiet awareness that the day was about to start, and I would need to step into a role. As more people arrived, the office began to breathe. Footsteps, greetings, the clinking of cups in the kitchen, the low murmur of conversations. I could hear my colleague Anna laughing softly near the printer. I could hear Martin asking someone if they had seen his charger. And all around me, screens lit up like small windows into private worlds. Not long after, my inbox filled with new emails. Subject lines stacked one after another. Some urgent, some polite, some vague. I opened a few, replied quickly, then leaned back in my chair. For a moment, there was nothing pressing, nothing that truly demanded my attention. So what did I do? I did what many of us do. I leaned forward again, placed my hands on the keyboard, and began to type. Not because I had something important to write, but because the act of typing felt like proof that I was working. My fingers moved across the keys in a steady rhythm. Click, click, click. I scrolled through documents I had already read. I opened a spreadsheet I did not really need. I switched between tabs, back and forth, back and forth. From the outside, I looked very busy, focused, productive, engaged, but inside, I was somewhere else. My mind drifted to the way the light fell across the desk, to the faint buzz of the fluorescent lamps above, to the memory of last night's dinner, to a feeling I could not quite name. At one point, Anna walked past my desk. She glanced at my screen, then at me, and said, "You look busy today." I smiled automatically and replied, "Yes, I'm swamped." That is a phrase people use a lot in offices. I'm swamped. It means overwhelmed, buried in work, barely able to breathe under the weight of tasks. But in that moment, it was not entirely true. I was not swamped. I was simply hiding inside the appearance of busyness. Later, during lunch break, I sat alone by the window with my sandwich. From there, I could see the street below, people moving in all directions like water in a stream. I watched a woman in a red coat pause at a crosswalk, then step forward confidently when the light changed. I watched a man balance a cup of coffee carefully as he hurried along, and I thought about how similar this was to our lives inside the office. Always moving, always adjusting, always trying to stay in sync with the rhythm around us. When I returned to my desk, I noticed Martin sitting very still, eyes fixed on his screen. His fingers hovered above the keyboard, but he was not typing. I could tell he was thinking. Maybe about work, maybe about something personal. After a few seconds, he began clicking his mouse rapidly, opening and closing files with almost theatrical speed. I smiled to myself, not in judgment, but in recognition. I had done the same thing earlier. We were both pretending, in our own ways, that every second of our day needed to look productive. In moments like these, English becomes interesting to me, not as a set of rules, but as a mirror of our inner lives. Think about how we talk about work. We say things like, "I'm just catching up," or "I'll get to it," or "I've been so busy lately." These phrases are gentle shields. They protect us from questions we may not want to answer. They give us time. They make us look responsible, even when we are quietly overwhelmed or uncertain. I remember another day, months later, in a different office. This one had large glass walls and modern furniture. Everything looked bright, clean, and efficient. But beneath that surface, the same human feelings flowed quietly. It was late afternoon, and the energy in the room had shifted. The initial rush of the morning had faded. People were tired, their shoulders slightly slumped, eyes a little heavier. I noticed a young woman named Priya sitting at her desk, staring at her screen with intense concentration. Her brow was furrowed, lips pressed together. I watched her open a document, scroll for a few seconds, then close it again. She took a sip of water, adjusted her chair, and typed something quickly. Then she stopped. Her hands rested still on the keyboard. A manager walked by and asked, "How's everything going?" Priya smiled politely and said, "Good, just trying to wrap things up." That phrase, "trying to wrap things up," is another beautiful little piece of office language. It suggests progress, effort, and control, even if inside you feel scattered or stuck. After the manager left, Priya let out a very small sigh, almost invisible. I could sense that she, too, was somewhere between working and waiting, between action and reflection. Later that evening, when the office was nearly empty, I found myself alone at my desk again. The lights had dimmed automatically, responding to the absence of movement. My computer screen glowed softly in the darkness. I could hear the faint hum of the building, like a heartbeat. I leaned back in my chair and finally allowed myself to stop pretending. I closed my eyes for a moment. I let my shoulders relax. I noticed the quiet, and in that stillness, something became clear to me. We often think that being busy means being valuable, that if we are not constantly moving, constantly producing, constantly responding, we are somehow failing. But sometimes, pretending to be busy is simply a sign that we are human, that we need space, that we are trying to survive in a world that moves very fast. When I talk about this with you now, I am not teaching you a lesson about productivity. I am inviting you to notice your own experiences. Think about your own workplace, whether it is an office, a classroom, a cafe, a factory, or your home. Have you ever sat in front of a screen, fingers moving automatically, while your mind wandered elsewhere? Have you ever said, "I've been so busy," even when what you really meant was, "I am tired," or "I am unsure," or "I need a break"? Language holds these layers of meaning so gently. When someone says, "I'll circle back," it sounds professional, but it also carries a hint of delay, of needing time. When someone says, "in a minute," it can mean 60 seconds, or it can mean later when I am ready. When someone says, "let me check," it can be about information, or it can be about buying a moment to breathe. As I reflect on those days in the office, I realize that pretending to be busy is not always negative. Sometimes it is a small act of self-protection, a way of maintaining dignity in a space that can feel demanding or impersonal, a way of saying, without saying it, that your inner world matters too. I think about a quiet moment I shared with Anna one afternoon. We were both in the kitchen, waiting for the kettle to boil. The room smelled of tea and instant coffee. Outside the window, rain was beginning to fall in thin, gentle lines. Anna leaned against the counter and said softly, "Do you ever feel like you're busy all day, but at the end you're not sure what you actually did?" I smiled and nodded. In that simple exchange, we connected more deeply than in any meeting or email. There is a phrase in English that fits this feeling beautifully, going through the motions. It means doing things automatically, without full presence, simply because they are expected of you. Many of us go through the motions at work. We sit, we type, we attend, we respond, but part of us is elsewhere, drifting quietly. But here is where the theme becomes more gentle, more hopeful, because noticing that you are pretending to be busy is already a form of awareness. It is a small step toward being more present, more honest with yourself, and more compassionate toward others. I remember walking home one evening after a particularly long day. The sky was painted in soft shades of orange and pink. The city felt slower, as if everyone had finally exhaled. I passed by people still in their work clothes, loosening ties, rolling up sleeves, letting the mask of busyness slip away. As I walked, I thought about you, the listener. Maybe you had just finished your own workday. Maybe you were still in the middle of it. And I wondered how many moments of quiet pretending you had experienced. In English, there is something very powerful about being able to describe these subtle states. Not just saying, "I am busy," but saying, "I felt a little overwhelmed," or "I needed some space," or "I was just trying to get through the day." These phrases carry honesty, vulnerability, and humanity. Sometimes I feel that learning English is not only about vocabulary or pronunciation, it is about finding the words that match your inner life, about being able to say with clarity and kindness what you truly experience. When I sit in my office and watch people pretend to be busy, I do not see laziness. I see resilience. I see people trying their best in a complex world. I see quiet stories unfolding behind every screen. Maybe you have your own story like this. Maybe you remember a day when your calendar was full, your inbox overflowing, yet inside you felt strangely empty. Or a day when you had very little to do, but felt pressure to look occupied. Or a day when you finally allowed yourself to slow down, even for just a few minutes. These moments are not separate from language. They live inside it. When you say, "I'm swamped," you are not just describing workload. You are expressing a feeling. When you say, "I'll get to it," you are not just talking about a task. You are negotiating your time, your boundaries, your energy. As Thomas, I think about how often we perform busyness without really questioning it. We move from meeting to meeting, task to task, screen to screen, rarely stopping to ask ourselves why. And yet, in those rare quiet moments, like sitting by a window with a sandwich, or standing in a kitchen waiting for water to boil, we reconnect with something deeper. Maybe you've felt this too, that strange mix of fatigue and reflection that comes at the end of a workday, that moment when you take off your shoes, sit down, and realize how much you have carried inside you. Learning to talk about these feelings in English is not just language practice. It is an act of self-awareness. It helps you slow down, notice, and name your experience. And when you can name it, it becomes lighter. I want you to imagine yourself back in that office with me, the soft hum of computers, the gentle tapping of keys, the occasional laughter drifting across the room, and in the middle of it all, you sitting quietly, noticing your breath, noticing your thoughts, noticing how you sometimes pretend. There is something tender about that image. You are not judged. You are not rushed. You are simply seen. As I sit here now, speaking to you through these words, I feel grateful for these shared, ordinary moments. They remind me that behind every professional mask, there is a human being with hopes, doubts, and emotions. When you pretend to be busy at work, you are not failing. You are navigating. You are finding your way through expectations, responsibilities, and your own inner needs. And that journey is worthy of reflection, not criticism. So as you go back into your own day, whether that means returning to a desk, stepping into a meeting, or simply continuing to listen, carry this thought with you. You are allowed to slow down inside yourself, even when the world around you is fast. I often think about the small sounds that shape a workday, the gentle click of a mouse, the low tapping of keys, the distant ring of a phone that never quite reaches you. If you close your eyes right now, you can probably hear your own version of these sounds. They create a kind of invisible rhythm that carries you along, even when your mind wants to drift somewhere else. There was another afternoon, quieter than most, when I found myself watching The Office instead of working inside it. I remember this clearly because it felt like stepping outside of my own life for a moment, like observing a scene rather than performing in it. I sat at my desk, my screen filled with half-written emails, but my attention rested on everything around me. The sunlight slipped through the glass windows and stretched across the carpet in pale rectangles. I noticed how people adjusted their posture without even realizing it, shoulders tightening when a manager walked past, backs straightening when someone approached their desk. Across from me, Martin leaned back in his chair, eyes half closed. His computer screen glowed softly, reflecting in his glasses. His hands rested loosely on his lap, and for a brief moment, he did nothing. He simply existed there, suspended between tasks. Then, almost automatically, as if remembering where he was, he leaned forward again, clicked his mouse, and began scrolling quickly through a document. Busy again. Visible again. I realized that pretending to be busy is not always a conscious choice. Often, it is simply habit, a reflex, the way our bodies respond to being in a workplace, like speaking softly in a library or standing still in an elevator. Later that day, I had a meeting in a small conference room with glass walls. The room smelled faintly of dry markers and old paper. We sat around a long table, laptops open, notebooks ready, coffee cups lined up like quiet witnesses. People spoke in the language of efficiency deadlines, deliverables, next steps, follow-ups. Every sentence sounded polished, professional, carefully shaped. Yet behind those words, I could sense subtle currents of fatigue, frustration, and quiet hope. At one point, someone paused mid-sentence, searching for the right word. The room fell silent for a few seconds. In that silence, I felt something human and fragile, as if we were all briefly stripped of our roles. Then the word came, the meeting continued, and the smooth surface returned. Afterward, I walked back to my desk feeling heavier than before. Not overwhelmed, exactly, but aware of how much energy it takes to maintain the appearance of control, clarity, and constant productivity. In English, we have this interesting phrase, putting on a brave face. It means showing strength or positivity, even when you are struggling inside. Pretending to be busy at work is a similar performance, though often quieter, more subtle. You are not pretending to be happy, just occupied, necessary, untouchable. As evening approached, the office slowly emptied. Chairs rolled back, lights switched off, screens went dark. The once bustling space grew still, like a theater after the audience has left. I remained for a while, sitting alone, watching the last traces of the day fade. My reflection stared back at me from the black screen of my laptop, faint and almost ghost-like. In that moment, I thought about how different this stillness felt from the earlier busyness. There was no need to perform, no one to impress, no one to convince. I found myself thinking about you again, imagining you in your own version of this scene. Maybe you have sat alone at a desk late at night, surrounded by silence, finally able to breathe. Or maybe you have experienced the opposite, the crowded rush of an open office, where every movement feels watched. Both experiences shape how we relate to work, to language, to ourselves. When you say in English, "I've had a long day," it is more than a simple statement. It carries layers of emotion, effort, endurance, maybe even quiet pride. When you say, "I need a minute," you are not just asking for time, you are asking for understanding. I think about how often we rush through these phrases without really feeling them. But when you slow down, when you let the words sit with you, they become richer, more meaningful. Try saying this slowly with me, just in your mind or out loud if you feel comfortable. "I've had a long day." Notice how your breath moves as you say it. Notice what memories or feelings come up. And now try, "I needed some space." Let those words settle. They are not selfish. They are human. Sometimes I feel that if we could all admit, even quietly, how often we pretend to be busy, the world might feel a little lighter, We might smile at each other with more kindness, knowing we are all navigating the same invisible pressures. There was a moment, weeks later, when I found myself in a different workplace, this time as a visitor rather than an employee. I walked through rows of desks, observing people in their familiar routines. One man sat hunched over his keyboard, typing rapidly, eyes locked on his screen. But as I passed behind him, I noticed his shoulders tremble slightly, as if he were holding something inside. A tension, a thought, a feeling he could not express. I wanted to pause and say something gentle, something like, "It's okay to slow down," but instead I kept walking, respecting the invisible boundary of his professional space. Yet that image stayed with me, the quiet strain hidden beneath apparent productivity. In our modern world, work often asks us to be constantly available, constantly visible, constantly performing. Pretending to be busy becomes a kind of shield, a way to protect our inner world from too much exposure. But here, in this shared space between you and me, there is no need for that shield. You do not have to prove anything. You do not have to look productive. You can simply listen, reflect, and feel. I imagine you sitting somewhere, perhaps with your eyes half closed, letting these words wash over you like gentle waves. Each sentence carries you a little further into reflection, a little deeper into understanding. Maybe you remember a time when you sat at your desk, staring at your screen, pretending to read while your mind replayed a conversation, a worry, a dream. Maybe you remember feeling guilty for not being busy enough, or anxious for being too busy. All of that belongs to the human experience of work, and all of it deserves compassion. When I speak to you as Thomas, I am not just teaching English. I am inviting you into a quieter way of seeing your life through language. Every phrase, every story, every reflection is a small bridge between your inner world and the words you use to describe it. Sometimes I feel grateful for those moments of pretending to be busy because they forced me to slow down later, to notice myself more deeply. They taught me that presence is not always loud or dramatic. Sometimes it arrives quietly, in the space between keystrokes. Maybe you felt this too, that subtle shift when you stop performing and simply exist, even for a few seconds. As you move through your own work, your own routines, I hope you remember that you are allowed to pause inside yourself. You are allowed to breathe. You are allowed to notice. And when you speak English, whether in a meeting, a conversation, or just in your own thoughts, let it carry not just information, but your true experience. Because you are not just learning a language, you are learning how to express your life, how to name your feelings, how to connect with yourself and others in a more honest way. So the next time you catch yourself pretending to be busy, do not judge yourself. Smile inwardly. Recognize the moment and gently return to your breath. I sometimes return, in my mind, to the feeling of sitting at a desk when the office is almost empty. There is something very different about that silence compared to the silence of early morning. In the morning, the quiet feels like potential. Everything is still ahead of you. In the evening, the quiet feels like residue, the leftover traces of a day that has already passed through your body. I remember one particular evening when I stayed later than I planned. The sky outside had turned a deep, heavy blue, the kind that feels like it is holding its breath. The fluorescent lights above me hummed softly, and the glass walls reflected my own shape back at me, slightly blurred, slightly distant. On my screen, There was a document open that I had already reviewed several times. I knew I did not need to read it again, yet my eyes moved across the lines anyway, almost automatically. My fingers hovered over the keyboard, ready to type something that was not really necessary. In that moment, I became aware of how deeply the habit of busyness lived in my body. Even when there was no audience, no manager, no colleague watching, I still felt the pull to appear occupied, even to myself. I leaned back in my chair and looked around the room. Empty desks, abandoned coffee cups, a forgotten notebook left open near the printer. It struck me how many small human traces remained behind after everyone had gone home. And then I thought about you again. Maybe you have experienced something similar. That strange restlessness that stays with you even after your official work is finished. That feeling that you should still be doing something, thinking something, proving something. In English, we sometimes say, "I can't switch off." It is a simple phrase, but it carries so much weight. It means your mind keeps working, even when your body is tired. It means you are still performing, still calculating, still worrying. I remember another day, weeks later, when I decided to experiment with myself. Instead of pretending to be busy during a slow moment at work, I chose to do something different. There was a period in the late morning when my inbox was quiet. My tasks were under control, and no one needed anything from me. Normally, I would have filled that space with unnecessary activity, opening files, rearranging folders, typing aimlessly. But this time, I simply stopped. I placed my hands gently on my desk, sat upright, and allowed myself to do nothing for 30 seconds. At first, it felt uncomfortable. My body wanted to move. My mind tried to invent reasons to be busy. But I stayed still. I noticed the sound of my breath, the weight of my feet on the floor, the faint smell of coffee drifting from the kitchen, the way the sunlight warmed the edge of my desk. No one came to check on me. No alarms went off. The world did not collapse. And in that small, quiet moment, I felt something rare in a workplace presence. Later, when Anna passed by, she paused and said, "You look calm today. Not busy, not stressed. Calm." I smiled and replied, "I'm trying something new." She laughed softly, but there was curiosity in her eyes. I tell you this because pretending to be busy is not something you need to erase from your life. It is part of how we navigate modern work, but becoming aware of it gently, without judgment, can change your relationship with it. Think about the language you use in your own workplace. Do you often say things like, "I'm snowed under," or "I've been running around all day," or "I haven't stopped"? These phrases paint a picture of constant motion, constant pressure. But what if sometimes you allowed yourself to say something different? Something like, "I had a quiet moment this morning," or "I took a few minutes to think," or "I slowed down." These are not lazy statements. They are honest ones. I remember sitting in a cafe after work one evening, watching people finish their days in their own ways. A woman across from me typed quickly on her laptop, occasionally glancing at her phone. A man beside her stared out the window, lost in thought. Two friends laughed softly at a small table near the door. From the outside, some of them looked busy, some looked relaxed. But inside, each of them carried their own invisible story of effort, expectation, and emotion. As I sipped my tea, I thought about how often we measure our worth by how busy we appear. In many cultures, busyness is almost treated as a badge of honor. If you are busy, You must be important. If you are not busy, something must be wrong. Yet, when I listen carefully to people's stories, I hear something else beneath that narrative. I hear longing for space, for quiet, for meaning beyond constant activity. Maybe you've felt this too, that tension between wanting to be productive and wanting to simply be. Language becomes a bridge here. When you can say, in English, I needed a break, or I felt overwhelmed, or I wanted to slow down, you give yourself permission to exist beyond the role of worker. I think about how we often hide behind professional phrases. Per my last email. As discussed, please advise. They are efficient, polished, safe, but they can also distance us from our true selves. In contrast, there are softer phrases that carry more humanity. I'm not sure. I need a moment. Thank you for your patience. I appreciate that. These words invite connection rather than performance. One afternoon, I overheard a brief exchange that stayed with me. Two colleagues were standing by the water cooler. One of them said, "You look tired." The other hesitated, then replied, "Yeah, it's been a lot." In that tiny pause, in that honest admission, I felt something beautiful, a crack in the armor of busyness, a moment of shared vulnerability. Pretending to be busy can isolate us, but admitting how we truly feel can bring us closer. As Thomas, I often reflect on how learning English intertwines with learning how to live. Every phrase you practice is not just about communication, but about how you understand yourself. When you say, "I'm doing my best," you are not just describing effort. You are acknowledging your humanity. When you say, "I'm trying," you are not just explaining action. You are revealing intention. I imagine you again, perhaps at your own desk, or walking home, or sitting quietly with your thoughts. Maybe you are replaying moments from your day, the emails you sent, the conversations you had, the times you pretended to be busier than you were. Notice those moments with kindness. They are not failure. They are signs that you are navigating a complex world. There is a quiet power in awareness. When you catch yourself typing just to look busy, you can gently smile inwardly and choose differently, even if that choice is simply to take one slow breath. And when you speak English, whether in a meeting or in your own inner dialogue, let your words reflect that awareness. Let them be honest, gentle, and clear. Because you are not here just to perform. You are here to experience, to feel, to grow. Sometimes I feel deeply moved by how much unspoken emotion lives inside ordinary workdays. Behind every spreadsheet, every report, every email, there is a person trying to balance responsibility with well-being, ambition with rest, appearance with authenticity. And as I sit here with you, sharing these reflections, I feel grateful for this quiet space we are creating together, a space where pretending can fall away, even just for a while. So as you return to your own rhythm, whatever that looks like, carry this with you. You are allowed to be still, even in a busy world. You are allowed to be human, even in a professional space. And when you find the words to express that in English, you are not just speaking a language. You are shaping your relationship with your own life. And so, as this conversation gently comes to rest, I want you to hold one last image in your mind. You sitting quietly somewhere, not performing, not proving, not pretending, just breathing, just being. Maybe the room around you is busy. Maybe it is silent. Maybe your workday is still unfolding, or maybe it has already ended. Whatever the case, let yourself exist for a moment without pressure, without urgency, without the need to look productive. Feel your breath move in and out. Feel your body supported by the chair beneath you. Notice that you are still here, still present, still whole, even when you are not busy. And remember, the next time you catch yourself typing just to look occupied, or moving quickly just to appear necessary, you can pause, you can soften, you can choose awareness over performance, even if only for a few seconds. Your English does not have to be perfect to carry that truth. It only has to be honest. You are not just learning words. You are learning how to notice your life, how to speak it gently, how to walk through your days with a little more clarity and kindness. So carry that with you as you return to your world. This is English with Thomas. I'm Thomas. Keep speaking, keep growing, and keep trusting yourself.